Welcome to the Skull King Football Podcast, presented by Yahoo DFS Firelines. Now, here are your hosts, Justin and Ryan Skullrood.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Skull King Fantasy Football Podcast. We have a very, very exciting show for you guys today, as this is our first three-headed monster show with all three of us here involved in the show today. Once again, my name is Justin, as your host. I'm going to have the other two guys introduce themselves here really quickly.
My name's Ryan. I'm the founder of Skull King Football.
And my name's Greg. I'm the one who's not related.
Thanks for joining us today, Greg. And Greg will be joining us for more episodes as we go throughout the season. Once again, the Skull King Fantasy Football Podcast brought to you by Yahoo DFS Firelines at yahoo.dfs.com. We have an exciting show for you today. We're going to get into some news and notes, cover some daily fantasy starts and sits, and then go over some starts and sits throughout the rest of the league and some advice on some additional players as well. So we will get right into the news and notes. Biggest piece of news that has happened in the last 12 hours is that Christine Michael, the starter for the Seahawks as of a couple of weeks ago, has now been claimed by the Packers. So there's a couple of questions I want to ask about this situation. First off, and we'll start with you, Ryan, is what does this say about the Seahawks offense and the trust in Rawls moving forward?
Well, obviously, I don't think that Pete Carroll would and John Schneider would be dropping Christine Michael if they didn't believe that Rawls was 100% healthy. Plus, on top of that, they still have Alex Collins. We have seen, at least through one game against a pretty tough opponent in New England, that CJ Prosise obviously is very talented and is fully healthy finally. And they also, I want to say that they also brought up Tremaine Pope, who is kind of a preseason kind of a darling for the Seahawks this year. So I think that really they obviously believe that Rawls is healthy, and that even if he's not completely healthy, they have enough faith in Prosise to be productive over the next couple of weeks as they phase Rawls in.
The other question that I have, and I'll shoot this one over to you, Greg, is when, if at all, does Christine Michael become fantasy relevant for the Packers?
But I think I'd go with if at all, and it would be never. So it's going to be the same situation like the other week where the Packers picked up or they made that trade with Kansas City to bring in what's his face?
Niall Davis.
That's right. Yeah, and he was already cut. I mean, granted, he was on my fantasy football roster, and I've already forgotten his name. And I don't really think there's any difference here with Michael. I mean, it's another one of these years with him where it's a bait and switch. There was a time last year where you thought, oh, maybe he was going to have his moment with the Cowboys, and nope, that didn't happen either. So I don't see him being relevant at all with Green Bay.
So you feel this is more of a Niall Davis 2.0 than a replacement for Ty Montgomery?
Absolutely right.
And we'll get into Ty here in just a little bit. But moving on, the Thomas Rawls question will come up later when we get into some of our starts and sits. But moving on, Randall Cobb was limited in practice on Wednesday. Ryan, do you feel that Cobb is a automatic start, or is this lingering issue something to where someone's going to have to go out and grab somebody off the waiver wire?
It kind of depends on what the rest of your wide receiver core looks like. Cobb has just been hard to trust all season. And so for me, this year I did not have any shares in Randall Cobb. I thought that, with what happened last year when I had him then, that I wasn't sure that he was – I was kind of thinking that the year before was kind of a flash in the pan, that it wasn't the real Randall Cobb, that just, things worked out really well for him. And so this year I didn't have any shares in Randall Cobb, and I didn't I was hesitant just because I didn't know how well he was going to hold up, how well he was going to play. He wasn't really getting away from defenders last year, and obviously we're seeing that this year. And not only that, he just can't seem to stay healthy. So he is not an auto start. If you've got some decent depth on your roster at wide receiver, I would definitely be looking somewhere else.
Here's a question. Do you go with, just throw this out there, would you feel safer starting Marvin Jones or Randall Cobb?
Honestly, because of the matchup, I'd actually go Marvin Jones.
Okay.
Here's why. Because Marvin Jones, they're coming off a bye, and I'm hoping and praying for some of my fantasy teams that Marvin Jones is able to get more involved in the offense after the bye week. They're also playing against Jacksonville. The Lions are, I believe, at home against Jacksonville. So for me, that kind of boosts Marvin Jones up a little bit, while Cobb is going up against the Washington Redskins, and their pass defense has actually been semi-decent. Let's see if I've actually got that up here in front of me. The Washington pass defense, they are they're right in the middle of the pack in terms of yards per game at 250, but it's a lot better than what their run defense is, and so there are enough targets there's enough other places to go in the Packers receiving core that I'm okay to start Marvin Jones over Randall Cobb. So
okay, sticking with the Packers for another question. There was no sign of Ty Montgomery with either the running backs or the wide receivers today during the open portion of practice. And so to kind of review the last question, Greg, do you feel that this is an indication that James Starks is the man moving forward, even though they've liked Ty Montgomery over the last couple of weeks? Or is this an indication that he's just, I don't know, does it say anything? Or does it say that Starks is the man, or potentially Christine Michael now being added into the rosters in the mix?
So I would say that Starks is the man, but I think if Montgomery's healthy, they're likely to go with whatever the hot hand might be in a given game, and it'll be more matchup oriented. Either way, I don't think either one is necessarily a great play unless you're talking about flex positions. I mean, you got to be really desperate at running back to have James Starks be your guy there, and where else are you going to slot Montgomery? I mean, I generally wouldn't call him a top 3 receiver in anything out of a really, really deep league. So, they're both ultimately flex plays, and I think that's the same way that Green Bay is going to use them in reality. Whoever's got the hot hand is going to play more that week.
And then moving on, Larry Fitzgerald did not practice again on Wednesday. I know we talked a lot about this off the air, Ryan, but does there seem to be a curse within the number 2 wide receiver position there at Arizona? Is this a bad indication for Larry Fitzgerald, or is this once again another one of those veteran sits during practice, do you feel?
I think for me, let me see. I'm actually looking at something on Larry Fitzgerald right now. I think it looks like they're pretty optimistic that he's going to play against Minnesota. We were talking a little bit about the curse of the wide receiver 2 in Arizona with how bad Michael Floyd has been the last couple years. They say that J.J. Nelson is going to be the guy, and he has a couple drops and is pretty unproductive in the last game. John Brown's been injured or he's also dealing with this sickle cell thing like Ty Montgomery. So I honestly think that Larry Fitzgerald will be fine for the next game, for the game against Minnesota. I really think that this is more of probably a veteran sit thing.
Another one that could be along the same lines, DeMarco Murray did not practice on Wednesday. Greg, are there any concerns about DeMarco Murray losing any sort of share of the workload to Derrick Henry, or is it one of these things that there was a lot of indications of DeMarco Murray being hesitant, but then he busted off on the first play for a 75-yard touchdown? Does it really mean anything that he didn't practice today?
No, I don't think so. I think he's still ultimately the man there. He's had a great bounce back season given what took place in Philadelphia. He's got a decent matchup here against Indianapolis. So I think it's one of those things where he's still going to get the lion's share of carries, 80% of the touches. Would be my guess.
Okay. And then another player who's looking to get the lion's share of carries, Theo Riddick was going into practice but should be back. That's kind of a little bit of a pun there. Jordan Howard was back practicing on Wednesday, so we should see a return of the Brother Bear from Chicago. Rob Gronkowski, this is something I want to throw out to you guys, is not practicing again. Is this an indication that – I mean, there's a lot of mixed reports this week of – it was a punctured lung, then it's just a regular chest injury. Now he's sitting out, and it's not a chest injury, but could be something else. Is this looking like a prolonged absence for Rob Gronkowski, or is this just something that they're going to have to go with day-to-day, Ryan?
I think this is somewhat day-to-day. As far as I can tell, they're pretty much expecting that he is not going to play against San Francisco. I actually saw a report saying that he actually, because of, even though they had said that it wasn't a punctured lung, that it was just kind of a quote unquote chest injury, they kind of downgraded it to. They still say that as of right now, he probably wouldn't fare well at the pressure of high altitude. So they've basically grounded him so that he can't fly. So I think I think they'll leave him out this week, give him a chance to just get some rest so that he could possibly be ready for the Jets. It could turn into a multi-week thing, but as of right now, it looks like it may become serious. But for right now, I think we just take it as a 1 week absence and look at starting Martellus Bennett. So.
Okay.
People that I would just like to jump in and say there's a group of people that can relate to Rob Gronkowski owners in fantasy football. That's anybody who's ever owned a European car. It's constantly in the shop, great to drive. It's amazing when you have it. But guess what? In that period of time when you're really counting on, might not start. You got to go leave it at the shop over the weekend. Got to get the rental.
It'd be expensive to fix.
Right. No Beamer this weekend, baby. We got the Hyundai Sonata.
So are you saying that Martellus Bennett is a Hyundai Sonata?
No. I mean, I think he's a sensible – he might be Camry class, maybe the two-door Accord. I mean, he's a solid player, and it's not bad to have to take him out. But, boy, you really go high every year on Gronkowski, and you have to deal with this constantly. The guy is like – the biggest man on the planet and is constantly injured. Granted, he's a huge target for punishment, but I mean, just like walking wounded with the guy.
Yeah, that I think that mostly deals with his lack of discipline in the off season, the bro style partying, the keg stands, fill in the blank on whatever he does during the off season. It may be a lot of fun, but Belichick's got to be rolling his eyes half the time during the offseason on any sort of Gronkowski issue. And I was just thinking about this the other day. Maybe it's not as extreme, but and this is just kind of a joking question, is Gronkowski the healthier, better football player version of Johnny Manziel? I mean, if Gronkowski isn't a monster tight end, are we even talking about him, or are we throwing him over the edge of a boat like everyone did with Johnny Manziel? Maybe that's neither here nor there, but if either of you have a comment on that, that's what I thought about today.
I think, honestly, because Rob Gronkowski is talented and productive, I think for the most part, they see him as eccentric instead of an idiot, which there's a very fine line there. But, I really think that if this wouldn't be an issue, I mean, if he was as unproductive as Johnny Manziel, I mean, he would have had the boot long ago, especially from Belichick.
Yeah, or if he just played in Cleveland, because I mean I think certainly the structure that he's in, I mean there is just no margin for error, with Bill Belichick in that program there. But you stick anybody in Cleveland for any reason, and any number of bad things can happen. And so Johnny Manziel may have had a running start at drug addiction and partying, but Cleveland pushed him over the edge, as it does so many people in life. And I think Gronkowski would go the same way ultimately.
Okay, so bringing it back to fantasy football related questions, here's kind of our last question in the news and notes is that Coach Bruce Arians said that Patrick Peterson will shadow Stephon Diggs in Week 11. Are either of you afraid that this, massively undercuts Stephon Diggs' production? Minnesota is struggling on offense and has dropped the last 4 games, but Stephon Diggs is doing much better, getting 13 catches apiece in the last 2 games and very, very good yard share. Does Stephon Diggs now return to those not-so-flashy games where he was not getting much, or do you feel that Patrick Peterson will continue, or that Stephon Diggs will actually have a good week against Arizona? So I'll go with you, Greg.
I would think it significantly lowers his value. I mean, Arizona is the number 1 pass defense in the league as it is. And if Peterson, who, he certainly holds himself out as quite possibly is the number 1 corner in the NFL. He's certainly not out of the top 3. And so he's going to take that as a personal challenge. And that's going to be really hard for a struggling offense to try to get over on Patrick Peterson, trying to lock that guy down.
Yeah, and for me, if Patrick Peterson is on Stephon Diggs, they have no one else to throw the ball to, except for the little bit of a connection that that Sam Bradford has with Kyle Rudolph at tight end. Everyone was talking about, everyone thought that Charles Johnson a couple years ago was going to be the big breakout with how well, the connection that he had with Teddy Bridgewater and how well he kind of broke out at the end of that last year was it 2 years ago? And then last year, nothing. And he's proved again this year that he's nothing. And then, who else they've got? Laquan Treadwell, who has had his first catch last week or the week before, his first catch of the year. So, and with the offensive line struggles that they've had with the injuries there, Jerick McKinnon has been worthless as a running back. Matt Asiata is also droppable, but he's the only offensive person really, in my opinion, other than Stephon Diggs and Kyle Rudolph, who's actually worth considering having on your roster. And that's only in a standard league where Asiata might vulture a touchdown. That's it. That offense, there's no one else left on that offense. So if they can shut down, if Peterson is shutting down Stephon Diggs, there's no one else on that offense worth owning, really.
So you don't like Cordell Patterson in this, taking some of the attention away, or getting some of the attention rather from the quarterback position, with Diggs being heavily blanketed by Peterson?
No, because even if Peterson is shadowing Diggs, they've got other corners who can get the job done. Swearinger and I think Swearinger is good enough to be able to. I want to say he's a strong safety. Even if they move him out, they could move him out to a corner, and he could absolutely light up Cordell Patterson. Cordell Patterson is only going to be productive in return yards leagues where if he can get a couple of good returns.
Okay. So that wraps us up on the news and notes. Guys, take it away on the DFS starts for the week and who you guys like in DFS this week.
All right. Well, I'll go ahead and do our quick advertisement here. At Skull King Football, we have chosen Yahoo Daily Fantasy as our platform of choice. Yahoo Daily is the industry leader in fair play for DFS platforms. They make it easier for the little guy like you and me to be able to compete in their daily fantasy contests with 3 major aspects to its fair play rules. One of the main things they do is they limit entries to a maximum of 10 per user per contest. So if you've got one of those big contests that you're entering where there's, say, 1,500 entries, you can only put in a max of 10. If there's a smaller contest, say only 100 entries, you can actually only have 1% of the total entries. So you can only have one in one of those smaller contests. They identify veteran players with a badge, so you can see who you're going up against. You can try to avoid playing against some of the veteran players. They do have some beginner contests as well. And on top of that, they also eliminate and prohibit scripting tools to upload or edit entries. I know that on the bigger websites, you can actually upload what would be considered like lineup packs, where you load up like 50 lineups into a contest that are basically all off of like a spreadsheet type of program, and it'll load up all those for you. Yahoo has eliminated the possibility of doing that. So if you want to play daily fantasy without worrying about, again, playing against a whole bunch of pros, with hundreds of contests or with hundreds of entries in each contest, create an account, start playing on Yahoo Daily Fantasy today. It's one of the top platforms that is used by the Vox DFS guys. They have been really successful with Yahoo. And so go ahead and hop on there. Go to skullkingfootball.com/Yahoo Daily in order to get the sign-up links there to get a Yahoo DFS account. So, all right, Greg, you and I, here we go. The DFS lineups for this week. I know that you and I were we were talking a little bit before the show, kind of what we were looking at in terms of who's a good value, who should be. Generally talking, who should be a great matchup that you should take, but looking at some of the circumstances around those games, you may want to kind of avoid. So why don't we go ahead and start with the quarterbacks on Yahoo Daily, and you and I kind of talked a little bit about Tom Brady and Ben Roethlisberger, how they should be, if all things are equal, they should absolutely tear apart the defenses that they're going up against in San Francisco and Cleveland. However, it looks like we're looking at possibility of rain in both those games. And so is that enough for you to kind of move away and look somewhere else?
It is for me in Cleveland, just because, you see rain in San Francisco, and I've never really watched a game that takes place in San Francisco where the rain was something that I can recall altering the game. But every season in some place like Cleveland or Baltimore, you end up with one of these absolutely horrific weeks where it's a torrential downpour, you have a ton of turnovers, no offense, game ends 6-3. And so that's where I'm wary of spending a lot of money, even though it looks like a sure thing. So if I was going for one of the two, $1 separating the two of them, and the simple fact of the matter is that Tom Brady is way better than Ben Roethlisberger any day of the week, I would take Tom Brady.
Okay. And yeah, at $40, he is the high end play, but again, they're going against like we've been talking about, the epically horrible defense of San Francisco. Is there, kind of, if we're moving away from Tom Brady, is there kind of a value guy that you're looking at, maybe around $30, maybe a little bit more than that? What's a maybe like a tier 2 guy that you'd be looking at, tier 2 or 3 guy that you'd be looking at for this week?
Well, here's my guy, and he's going against my team, the Chicago Bears, and that guy is one Eli Manning. So while the Bears do have a solid defense, Eli is at home. The Bears' strength is more on the front seven than their secondary. So I think Eli at $29 is frankly a great play there.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you there. And last time you called Eli Manning as being the most likely to have a great game, he went off for 3 or 4 TDs. He still threw the 2 interceptions like we both predicted that he would, but I want to say on Yahoo it's only like -1, maybe -2 points for an interception, and considering how many yards he put up in the 4 TDs, those interceptions really didn't affect it at all. So.
Right, exactly. And the Giants are a very, very pass-happy team. They don't have much of a running game unless they get in, short yardage around the goal line. But, outside of that, I think Manning does have the ability certainly to throw for 3 scores against Chicago, probably have limited turnovers. Maybe he has 1, but, close to 300 yards.
Yeah, I want to let's see. They were actually talking about this at the Thursday night game. The New York Giants actually passed Minnesota for being in terms of being the worst run team in terms of yards per game. They have moved up to number 31 at 74 yards per game rushing because of that 30-yard or 25, 30-yard scamper at the end of the game by who was it? Was it Richard? Yeah, I think that's who it was. So, all right, moving on to my kind of value guy is I was looking at was Kirk Cousins at $32, going up against the non-existent Green Bay Packers pass defense. Mariota went off for 300 or almost 300 yards. I think it was like 296 and 4 TDs against the Green Bay defense. Green Bay is traveling to Washington. It's the Sunday night game. So in prime time, Kirk Cousins has actually been done pretty well in prime time. Not fantastic, but he's not like what we were talking about, Andy Dalton, who absolutely folds in prime time. So I could see Kirk Cousins having a really solid game. Pass the ball, especially if you wanted to, double up and stack him with say Jordan Reed. I think that could be a really good combination for DFS lineups this week. So,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, Green Bay is incredibly vulnerable. I mean, we're looking at a year where, frankly, just a lot of crazy things keep happening. And Green Bay trailing Detroit, and maybe having Detroit win the division is evidence of that. So I would agree that certainly Cousins has the potential to put up some nice numbers against Green Bay.
Quick side note: it's kind of interesting that the Detroit Lions moved up into first in the NFC North on the bye week without playing because everyone else lost.
That's amazing. Absolutely.
All right. So moving on to running backs. Obviously, we were talking about that Pittsburgh-Cleveland game. Are you willing to spend the $40 on Le'Veon Bell in this game with the possibility of rain?
Yeah, absolutely. This is where I did go heavy on my spending this week. Was to go in the running back space, and because if it is raining, a lot of check down passes, including just handing the ball off. So I think Bell is a safe play there to account for most of the offense in the game.
Yeah. I'm with you there. At this point, I almost want to say that I think it's probably fair to say that Ezekiel Elliott is practically matchup proof. Especially, this Sunday, Baltimore's defense has come on pretty strong lately, but it's at Dallas. I really think that Dallas just marches all over the field on Baltimore. I think that Dallas's defense has been playing pretty well, and I don't think that they allow Joe Flacco to get hardly anything done. Their running game Baltimore's running game hasn't been all that great, so I think I can see Dallas playing a whole lot of ball control and just letting Ezekiel Elliott run all over them, and not letting Flacco get anything done. And so I'm willing to spend the $36 on Ezekiel Elliott to let him do exactly what it is he does. So
at this point, I have a hard time betting against anything the Cowboys are doing because that team's really rolling. I think this is arguably they're going against the number one defense in the league as far as Baltimore is concerned. And they're one of these good all-around defenses. It's not like they're at the top in one thing and they kind of are average somewhere else. I mean, they're at the top of both passing and rushing, or top 5. So it's going to be a real challenge for Dallas's offense to keep rolling the way they are. But if they do, I mean, it's going to shift them from already being a, hey, maybe these guys are really for real type of discussion to, hey, these guys are really for real type of discussion.
Yeah. All right, so let's kind of go into that tier 2, tier 3 kind of thing for running backs if you're maybe looking for a little bit of a value. For me, well, let's see. Let's move down a little bit. Going back to that Cleveland-Pittsburgh game, there's a lot of news. There was a couple notes on Isaiah Crowell saying that Hugh Jackson has actually stated that he is wanting to get Isaiah Crowell more involved in the offense. Let me actually pull that up right here. He's actually indicated that he wants to get back to running the ball with Crowell, who finished after the first 5 first 4 games. Yeah, first 4 games. He had 394 yards, 3 touchdowns on 61 carries. He was averaging over 6 yards a carry. And that was against the defenses that he went up against were Philadelphia, Baltimore, Miami, and Washington. Washington's the only team that's really bad in terms of run defense. Those first 4. After that, they just got away from from running the ball. Since then, 13, 9, 12, 11, 6, and 9 carries. They just moved away from. He's had I want to say three touchdowns since then. 1 receiving and 2 running the ball. We saw this last week when we talked about CJ Prosise and Pete Carroll wanting to get Prosise more involved. And I think that with Isaiah Crowell, I think that being the running back type of guy that he is, that if Isaiah Crowell is going to get the ball more, if he says that he's going to get the ball more, I think that he will. And against Pittsburgh, who in most leagues gives up the 4th most points, fantasy football points to the running back position, I see that as a pretty favorable matchup for Crowell at only $22.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a pretty good value. I mean, you're usually hard pressed to find anybody in Cleveland that you want to trot out there. I had Terrell Pryor as a wide receiver just because every once in a while they're going to have to sling the ball way downfield and hope to score some points. But I think Crowell is certainly a good play. As far as values go that I had this week, on the running back side, I think certainly you could go deep value with Rob Kelly at Washington for Washington against Green Bay. Green Bay is not obviously a bad run defense at all, but certainly Kelly's been getting the lion's share of carries. He's got like 40-plus carries in the last a couple of weeks, which is a nice play. And for a little bit more, I think Todd Gurley, I think this is the week that you really see him get a lot of touches the way Fisher holds Goff with kid gloves up to this point. You've got to assume that they're going to come into this week with an offense that is really heavy on Todd Gurley and not heavy on Jared Goff. So options for not just carrying the ball, but again, check down passes and whatnot. He's going to have a lot of opportunities.
Yeah, I could possibly see him going that way. All right, let's moving on to the wide receivers. Again, we talk about a lot of these top guys being practically matchup proof. I mean, who are the wide receivers? I know you went really heavy running back this week, so you're kind of more going in the mid range on the wide receivers. If you didn't go so running back heavy, is there a wide receiver that you're really looking at on the top shelf?
This week, it's kind of tough for me. I think, top shelf, Antonio Brown, I'm concerned about the weather. So ultimately, I went with Eli Rogers because in case there is something going on with the passing game there, I think he's a better relative value at $15 versus $38 for what ultimately could be produced, especially if Le'Veon Bell is getting, a great, a lot of carries anyway, based on that weather. Otherwise, I like Jordy Nelson. I think he's really been coming on as far as him and Rodgers getting back together. He's certainly not top tier this week. I mean, he's maybe that kind of B range $25 play. Him or T.Y. Hilton is probably where I would look if I'm gonna spend higher dollars on a wide receiver.
Okay. Yeah, I'd have to agree. Maybe the other way to go would be we talked about Eli Manning at $29. If you want to stack him with Odell Beckham Jr., again, like you said, against Chicago, who's the main part of their defense is stopping the run with their front seven, and they've had a little bit of trouble on the back end. In one league I want to say Chicago has given up the most fantasy points to wide receivers. So maybe stacking, if you're going to go Eli, stacking with Odell Beckham Jr., kind of see how that could work out for you. So
always like the double dip.
And then you already talked about Eli Rogers there is kind of a value play. We're to say he's like $15 for Eli Rogers.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's the number 2 option pretty much this week.
Yeah, I like maybe spending a little bit more up in that kind of that second shelf range at Jamison Crowder. Again, the Green Bay defense. We talked about. I talked about Kirk Cousins at only $32. I think a little bit less expensive of a a stack would be to go with Jamison Crowder, Washington going up against that non-existent Green Bay defense in terms of the passing. We look at how he's scored even on just for this season on Yahoo Fantasy, which is a half-point PPR on here. He's had 2 games. James Crowder's had 2 total games of less than 11 points on Yahoo Fantasy. So I mean, if you're using him as even a wide receiver 2 or 3, he's heavily involved. I mean, his targets have kind of ranged back and forth, but he also does some returning. And while you don't necessarily get return yards on Yahoo, you do get the return TDs. So if someone gets a return TD, which he has 1 or 2 of them already this year, he's got 5 receiving TDs. Through 9 games, he's got 535 yards. So, I mean, he's on pace for 1,000 yards as well. So I think that, if you can maybe stack that way with a little bit of value, that could really help out. If you're going to want to really pile up the amount of cash you're paying on running backs, that could be a good way to go.
Yeah, solid play.
All right, on to the tight ends. So we obviously know that Rob Gronkowski is not playing this week. We talked about, Jordan Reed. Honestly, he's going to be a solid play, especially if you can stack him with Cousins. So beyond those two, where are you looking at tight end?
I really like to ride Martellus Bennett, frankly, all season, even with Gronkowski there. Without Gronkowski there, I think you go even heavier towards Martellus. I mean, he shows up on the injury report each week, but he's playing each week too. He's definitely the best option they have in the red zone. Him and Brady really have some great chemistry. And he's only $16. So by the time I got down to picking tight ends, that'd be great for me. Unfortunately, I didn't have $16. I only had about $11, so I got Dwayne Allen.
All righty. Yeah, I like that Martellus Bennett pick also, and simply because with a lot of the injuries that happen, what happens when they put rosters out and values out for daily fantasy sites, what they tend to do is they put them out like they get everything set like the week before. And so they can't, they're not taking players off, so if someone's injured or even, you look at on the wide receiver list, Alshon Jeffrey is listed on there even though he's suspended for 4 games.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of that stuff, they can't just, it's not something that they can get in, take off. They've already got everything uploaded and ready to go. And with how big the site is, it would just be too much of a pain. So obviously, to avoid some guys. And with Martellus Bennett, the value that he is, $16, if it wasn't for the fact that Gronk is out and Martellus is at $16, I would go with the guy that we name every week in CJ Fedorowicz. $16. They're playing in on the Monday night game against Oakland, who gives up a ton of yards in the passing game. He's only $16. But again, at the price that you're going to be getting him, Martellus Bennett is the way to go. I mean, unless you're willing to spend a lot higher and maybe stack, say, a Marcus Mariota with a Delaney Walker, I really think Martellus Bennett is probably going to be one of your better plays to go with this week.
Absolutely, it is a favorable matchup. And if I could just digress for 1 second on Alshon Jeffrey, and if anybody's ever watched Alshon Jeffrey play, which I unfortunately have, and I realize that he's not a number 1 wide receiver, but thinks he needs that money, I was wondering what performance-enhancing drugs he was using, because he's not running by anybody, he's not completely jumping over anybody, and most importantly, he can't catch. So where are those drugs working? Because the only positive reading you're getting is on the urine test, and it's not on the field.
I think there was just enough potency left in them to show up on the urinalysis, but they were probably just past their expiration date. Is my guess.
He's buying the wrong vitamins off Costco's list, or what?
Right. I mean, Josh Gordon, smokes incredible amounts of weed and puts up nearly 1,800 yards in a season. This guy takes performance-enhancing drugs and can't catch a cold in a freaking elementary school.
Pretty much. So, all right. Moving on to our last little section here with the defenses. There's a lot of defenses that are, it's amazing how much you're having to pay for defenses now on DFS. I remember the first couple weeks looking at this, because of where a lot of the defenses were, there was a lot of unknowns. You were paying, a max of like $16, $17 for a defense. Now you got Minnesota at $21. The Chiefs at 20, the Patriots at 19. I think it would be a mistake to use the Patriots defense. They're going to be up enough in the San Francisco game that I think Colin Kaepernick could put up some good numbers against them. Running the ball, he's going to get, he'll get the rush yards. Could get even a couple passes, maybe a passing touchdown or two. So, I mean, I would avoid spending on, say, the Patriots defense. If you've got the budget, I really like the Miami Dolphins defense against the LA Rams. You've got Jared Goff announced as the starting quarterback. On top of that, you have the Miami Dolphins defense. Where are they? Let me look at it. In terms of rushing yards per game on the defensive side, where is Miami? They are
Miami's 29 against the rush, and they're giving up 4.4 a carry, almost 129 yards a game.
Yeah, so like you were saying, that could be a good game for Gurley. But if they spend more time actually stacking the box, and try to force Goff to beat them, that still could end up in their favor. And so, plus, I mean, last week they had four picks in the fourth quarter alone, one return for a touchdown against Phillip Rivers. So if they can manage to get ahead, because LA's defense has had its issues, if they can manage to get ahead and force LA to have to pass the ball and not give the ball to Gurley, that could work in their favor. So, kind of what was another defense that maybe you were looking at? Maybe since I know that you stack the rest of your players and kind of just fit in a defense where you've got the money.
Yeah, it's always just what I have left over. And this week, I can't believe I'm doing it, but I'm saying the Detroit Lions, and I think it's just because they're at home. It's favorable against Jacksonville. There's a few quarterbacks in this league where each week you're going to get turnovers, and Jay Cutler's obviously one of them, but Blake Bortles is another one. And it's a lot of these. I mean, anytime you have a turnover, you're throwing interceptions, there's always a chance for a pick six is the way I look at it, for a defense to score and give you some bonus points. So I want to take Detroit at home against Jacksonville for $13.
I like that at the value. I think that's a solid way to go. Because I'm not really liking any of the rest of these defenses down towards the bottom. You could maybe make a case for the New York Giants at home with Jay Cutler throwing the ball around.
Yeah, I think that's probably pretty on the nose. I could have gone that route, and I wanted to try to avoid another Jay Cutler rant this week. But as I said last week, what you were going to get, Ryan, when you took that guy and he gave you what I said he was going to give you, and it was a Jay Cutler game, but it was the one touchdown, multiple turnover type of game that Jay has just such an affinity for. And the fact is, Jay knows he's not going to be on the Bears next year, and Jay actually knows he's probably not going to be in the NFL next year. He might be a backup somewhere, but I'm going on record now saying he will not be a starter anywhere because he's not going to accept going to Cleveland. He's not uprooting his family and going just about anywhere. He doesn't need the money. He's probably been betting large chunks of this money against the Bears for years, because I'd like to know what the Bears are against the spread in the Jay Cutler era, because it's uncanny how bad this guy is in periods where you think that he might have a chance to do something. So absolutely, anytime you got Cutler on the calendar, you can feel free to write in that defense as a value. I should have picked it up myself. My fault.
All right. Well, Justin, I can see on the little picture here, I can actually watching Justin cracking up and practically falling off his chair laughing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with the Jay Cutler thing. It's one of those things that for years, I know that Ryan would stream him, I think either last year or the season before, and for the life of me, I'm like, why?
Because you're looking again. I was never expecting him to have the huge game. When I was streaming quarterbacks, I go by the theory of all you really want is 250 and 2, which he is capable of. His typical game is around 300 yards. It's just whether or not you're going to get the 2 touchdowns and 1 interception, or the 1 touchdown and 4 interceptions. So, and honestly, in the matchups I was able to take him, I usually, 2 out of 3 games that I had him were pretty good. It was just, usually the one that cost me big. So
that's how I got a contract extension and robbed the city of Chicago, because for every $1 Jay Cutler gets, it's a million tears from each Bear fan around the world. We could end the drought if we could just simply harness the tears we have of watching this man play football and rob us every single week.
all right, so that's it for our DFS portion. All right, Justin, let's give it back to you, and let's go through some start sit info.
So these are some of the scenarios that people have asked about, and some scenarios that some acquaintances are dealing with when it comes to some starts and some sits this week. We'll start off with a running back position decision. Do you start Doug Martin versus Kansas City, or do you start Theo Riddick against Jacksonville, Ryan?
For me, are we talking standard or PPR? Because, usually you and I play PPR.
Go standard. We'll go standard.
We're going standard.
Doug Martin is still not fully healthy. Theo Riddick has done some serious damage, especially in PPRs. But in order to level the playing field, we'll go with standard.
Well, here's the deal. Kansas City is giving up 121 yards per game on the ground. So, I think that could be – if you're going to go standard, I could see Doug Martin. It looks like they didn't have him fully involved in the offense last week. They didn't necessarily need him. But for me, in standard, I would probably go Doug Martin against Kansas City. Although Tampa Bay isn't much better. They give up 118 yards on the ground. But Theo Riddick doesn't run the ball a whole lot. He's more of the, he'll run a few times and catch the ball out of the backfield. They're pretty much, I almost want to say like a second-rate version of the Patriots offense, where their short passing game is their run game, because they really don't have. New England has LeGarrette Blount, who can run the ball really well, but at least get the short yards that's needed, especially around the goal line. But Detroit doesn't really have that. Dwayne Washington hasn't been able to do that. Amir Abdullah didn't really do that when he was healthy the first few weeks of the season. And so Zach Zenner hasn't been able to do that. So really, I think that if it's in PPR, you go Theo Riddick. If it's in standard, you go Doug Martin. So that's my opinion. I don't know if Greg has a different thought on that one.
No, I would agree with that. Definitely the Detroit's no rushing juggernaut. So if you're not in a PPR league, I would go against that. Jacksonville has given up more touchdowns rushing. They have given up 9 rushing touchdowns versus Kansas City at 4, but I would still, as much as I can't stand Doug Martin, I guess I'd go with Doug Martin.
So moving to a quarterback head-to-head matchup, I'll throw this one to you first, Greg. Do you take Andrew Luck or Marcus Mariota? Now, before you answer, I want to throw a few stats in there because it seems obvious that you would go with Mariota. But Andrew Luck is coming off of a bye. Last time they played Tennessee, he threw for 353 and 3. And the last time that Mariota played Indianapolis, it was his lowest scoring game in his big 7-game run that he's had. Do you still like Mariota, or do you like Luck this week in the heads-up matchup against Tennessee?
Yeah, it is. I think when you get through the end of the week, you're going to look down, and it's going to be a push between the two guys. There's going to be negligible difference between the two. But for me, I'm going to go with Andrew Luck at home.
Okay. Ryan, this one is over to you. Do you start Jameis Winston against Kansas City, or do you go with Tyrod Taylor, who's kind of had the hot hand right now against Cincinnati? Right now, Tyrod Taylor was our number 1 pickup quarterback position for those who have people like Matt Ryan and Phillip Rivers. But do you like Tyrod Taylor even over Jameis Winston right now for this week?
Jameis, let's see. I honestly, for me, I would only play Jameis Winston this week if you had Mike Evans to kind of double up on the points there. I think I like Tyrod Taylor this week as kind of the pickup streamer of the week between those two. because Taylor's able to run the ball a lot more to get more yards that way. Winston's Winston has been known to give up the turnovers as well. Tyrod Taylor does a little bit better job of protecting the ball, so he's not giving up as many turnovers. And so they're able to I think that Buffalo is able to use the play action game a lot better with LaShawn McCoy and Mike Gillislee to be able to get the ball to Robert Woods. Not they have really anyone else to pass to. But even Robert Woods put up 160 yards on 10 catches against Seattle in Seattle. So I could see. I mean, for me, I would probably go Tyrod Taylor. For me, it's kind of a coin toss, but I like Tyrod Taylor this week.
Moving to the running back position in Seattle, do you like CJ Prosise or Thomas Rawls this week, Greg? With Thomas Rawls coming back, all indications are he's going to have a much bigger role with not starting last week and getting some action this week. But does he overtake Prosise in the production this week?
I'm going to show my bias here and go with the Golden Domer, which I know a lot of football fans don't like because some people hate Notre Dame and other great people love Notre Dame. And so I'm going to go with CJ Prosise here. I think he's the more talented back when it comes to all around. I mean, he was a former receiver, transferred over and became a running back. And that, to me, as somebody who watched that team for a long time, not saying that CJ Prosise is Ricky Waters, the second coming, but maybe he's a little bit like Ricky Waters.
Nice throwback to a former Seahawks running back.
Right.
I'd have to agree there. I think that with how well Prosise played last week against New England, they'll want to be. I think that they have the luxury of being a little more cautious with how much they get Thomas Rawls involved this week, and steadily work up his workload over the next couple weeks. So.
Okay, moving to another running back decision. Ryan, do you like TJ Yeldon versus Detroit or James White against San Francisco more? This is like a battle of which putrid run defense would you like to play against. But
I didn't even let you get to the second option, and I already said no on TJ Yeldon.
But White, who's been used a lot more within New England, only got like 2 carries and 4 catches last week against Seattle. Now Seattle is definitely not San Francisco, but do you still like White over Yeldon against San Francisco?
Well, here's the problem with James White is we still don't know how much they're going to get Dion Lewis involved in the offense. Looking here. Yeah. Okay. So the little news came out that Bill Belichick has admitted there will be a certain quote unquote build up process with Dion Lewis. I think they're still working on getting him actually into game shape. So I still think that. So yeah, James White's probably still the guy to use this week. Maybe not necessarily to own for fantasy playoffs. I honestly think James White, because the offense is that much better, and they've. In the last couple weeks, let me actually pull up Yeldon's stats real quick. For TJ Yeldon, over the last few weeks, I know that Chris Ivory's actually had a couple of good weeks. 2 weeks ago, he finished in full point PPR. He finished with 15.5 points, 7 attempts, but only 33 yards. He got a lot of his in a lot of his points in the passing game. I'd honestly have to say I'd probably still go with James White just because the fact that he has Tom Brady throwing to him and not Blake Bortles. I think that right there should be enough. If all things being equal, everything else being equal, that should be the deciding factor.
So you're not afraid of New England jumping out to a huge lead and then them just cramming the ball while running with the one force object?
They could. However, James White could be a part of that jumping out to a big lead with a pass, with a dump off pass that he runs for, or a screen pass that he runs for a touchdown. So I haven't seen much out of Malcolm Mitchell this year. I have not seen much out of Chris Hogan. He's been a bit of a disappointment from where everyone was expecting him to be. And so I still think that James White, and honestly, the Seahawks just played great defense against New England. San Francisco is not that defense.
Yeah.
And so I think that James White will be a little bit more involved and be able to do a little bit more this week than he did last week. And therefore, I think he's the better pick over TJ Yeldon.
Okay, only 2 questions left to go, and so I'll throw this one to you, Greg. Do you take Jarvis Landry this week against LA or Willie Snead against Carolina? Willie Snead had 2 touchdowns last week on 5 catches, but that's really been the only splash he's had since week 2. Do you take Landry or do you take Snead this week?
You know what? I'm going to go with Snead just because, following this week, once Matt Ryan and Drew Brees are evened up here on the bye weeks, Drew Brees is going to be well ahead of Matty Ice as far as performance for the season. He's obviously gotten over on Carolina before. I don't see this week being any different. So you got to go with the better quarterback in that situation. I mean, on the other side of the coin, you're dealing with Ryan Tannehill, which you cannot put your week in that guy's hands and hope that it's always going to work out. So I mean, I would go with Snead here, especially if we were doing DFS. You got a much better value in there, I would think.
Okay, and then our last question coming in, we touched on this one just before the show. Who has a better week this week, Ryan? Jay Ajayi, who didn't score last week. In the first week, he hasn't scored in a couple of weeks. Or Todd Gurley, who has struggled this year but is looking to get a much bigger carry load this week with Jared Goff getting a start.
That's the fun thing, is that they're actually going up against each other this week in L.A. I still think, Todd, I heard an interesting comparison between Todd Gurley, who played really well his first season, and Trent Richardson, who played pretty well his first season and then absolutely tanked because he didn't have anyone. He got the snot beat out of him because he had no one to block for him in Cleveland, and then got traded, and then nothing ever seemed to work for him. I don't think that Todd Gurley is the next Trent Richardson. I still think he's talented and can get the job done. But the LA offensive line is horrendous. They are terrible. Now Miami is giving up 128 yards per game on the ground. I think that their focus is going to be to stop Todd Gurley. And like we said, their pass defense has been pretty good the last few weeks, getting turnovers. So the LA defense, they're giving up 103 yards on the ground per game. And so the strength lately of Miami has been making Ryan Tannehill a game manager and not putting the ball in his hands when the game is on the line, and letting Jay Ajayi run the ball. And so I personally would go with Jay Ajayi. I think that the overall offense, even with how bad Tannehill is, he's better than Jared Goff. And so I think the overall offense favors Jay Ajayi over Todd Gurley this week. What are your thoughts, Greg?
I think based on the way the season's played out, that certainly makes sense, and that would be the logical play. But I mean, I think at this point, based on how much Goff is going to be limited, I think Gurley here is the play. I really actually do like your comparison to Trent Richardson, and obviously he's not Trent Richardson, but he is a guy who in his second year is struggling a lot. I think, against Miami's defense, he has the chance to certainly improve that. But, if he doesn't, and if this isn't a week, then you have to wonder if there is going to be a week where he does it all this season. So I would go with Gurley at this point.
Okay, so that unless anybody else has anything additional to add, that looks like that will wrap up the show. Do you, Greg, or Ryan have anything else that you want to say before we wrap up the show?
I think I'm good. Yeah, I don't think I got anything else. Greg, any more rants?
I am not going to rant anymore this week. I will save that up for next week.
Well, let me tee up one question for you. Last 30 seconds of the show. Do you take Ryan Tannehill or Jay Cutler this week?
Anytime you can take another quarterback when listed next to Jay Cutler, you take that quarterback. And that's actually a really great question, Justin, because I was looking at this earlier, and if I could just get back to my DFS page here, there was an amazing value because we were talking about value picks. Well, I'll talk to you about a value pick. If we look down here at Jay Cutler, $24, right? $24. Jay Cutler is a starting quarterback. As far as I know, Chicago doesn't have another quarterback on its roster. Now, if we go
it's Matt Barkley.
Yeah, so like I said, they don't have another quarterback on the roster. So if we go under Jay Cutler by just a little bit, and we look at players who aren't playing this week, Zach Mettenberger, $20. He's the number 3 guy on the depth chart, arguably. He is the better play this week than Jay Cutler.
Okay, I had to throw that up there. I couldn't resist the angst and the rants there. But once again, thank you everybody for joining us today for the Skull King Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by Vox DFS and Vox DFS Firelines. Once again, I am your host, Justin Skullrood, and with me for today's show, go ahead and sign off, guys.
I'm Ryan Skullrood, founder of Skull King Football.
Then I'm Greg Talcott, disenfranchised Bears fan.
Enjoy your week, guys.
All right, talk to you later, guys.